The gunshot reverberated across my farm, slicing through the stillness of the evening like a thunderclap. My heart pounded so violently I could feel it in my throat. In the distance, a figure staggered, clutching their side, and let out a piercing scream. For a moment, time stood still. My hands trembled as I lowered my shotgun, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixing with the fresh scent of the countryside. Then, the realization hit me like a sledgehammer. I had shot someone. I rushed forward, my boots crunching over dry leaves and dirt. The woman, her face contorted in pain, gritted her teeth as she slumped against my wooden fence. Even in the dim light, I recognized her. It was Maggie, the woman who had been nothing but a thorn in my side since the day she became the head of our homeowners association. And now, she was on my land, trying to steal from me. How had it come to this? Let me start from the beginning. I had moved to this quiet little town in Texas to escape the chaos of city life. For years, I had been a cog in the machine of corporate America, slaving away behind a desk, drowning in emails and endless meetings. But when my father passed away, leaving me his farm, I saw it as a fresh start, a chance to reconnect with something real. I poured my heart and soul into restoring the land, planting crops, raising a few animals, and building a self-sufficient life. It wasn't easy, but it was fulfilling. The only problem? The HOA. You see, my farm bordered a suburban community. I never thought much of it until the complaints started rolling in. At first, they were minor. A letter in the mail about my fence being too tall, a warning about the odor from my animals. Then came Maggie. Maggie wasn't just any HOA president. She was the queen of complaints, the empress of entitlement. She made it her personal mission to ruin my life. "You're bringing down the property values," she screamed at me one afternoon, her manicured finger stabbing the air in front of my face. "This is private land," I told her, wiping sweat off my brow. "You don't have any authority over my farm." She pursed her lips and stormed off, but I knew she wasn't done. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Anonymous complaints were filed against me. Mysterious inspectors showed up, checking my land for violations. I even caught someone trying to let my animals loose in the middle of the night. But I wasn't about to back down. One evening, I was fixing up the barn when I heard a noise, something rustling in the bushes near my property line. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the sound, my dog, Max, trotting beside me. Then I saw them, two figures creeping toward my equipment shed, their movements slow and deliberate. My heart pounded. Thieves. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and called out, "Who's there?" The figures froze. One of them bolted instantly, disappearing into the darkness. But the other one, she turned toward me, caught in the beam of my flashlight. "Maggie, what the hell are you doing on my land?" I demanded, taking a step closer. She scoffed. "I was just making sure you weren't violating any HOA rules." "At night? On my private property?" I took another step. "What's in your hand?" She clutched something close to her chest. I recognized it instantly, one of my tools, a high-end chainsaw I had just bought. My blood boiled. "You're stealing from me." I didn't wait for her to finish. I reached for my phone to call the sheriff, but before I could, she lunged at me. I stumbled back, losing my balance, and that's when Max, normally the sweetest dog you'd ever meet, snarled and leaped between us. Maggie shrieked and swung the chainsaw wildly, missing Max by inches. Adrenaline took over. I didn't think. I just reacted. I grabbed my shotgun from where it leaned against the fence post. I only meant to scare her. I fired a warning shot into the air, but Maggie panicked. She spun around, tripping over the fence, and in the chaos, bang, the bullet caught her in the side. She collapsed against the fence, her breath ragged, her hand clutching her wound. I stood there, frozen. Then she looked up at me, her eyes filled with shock and something else, hatred. I knew in that moment this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Maggie's scream echoed through the night, sending a shiver down my spine. My heart pounded in my chest as I rushed toward her, my hands shaking. The shotgun felt heavy in my grip. I had never shot a person before. Her eyes were wild, full of shock and fury as she pressed her hands against her bleeding side. You shot me," she gasped, her breath ragged. I fell to my knees beside her, my mind racing. "It was an accident," I said, barely able to hear my own words over the blood roaring in my ears. Maggie whimpered, her face twisted in pain. I needed to act fast. The wound didn't look life-threatening, but she was bleeding badly. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's been a shooting. A woman's been hit. It was an accident. I need an ambulance now. The dispatcher started asking me questions, but my mind was spinning too fast to answer properly. Maggie groaned, her head rolling back against the wooden fence. I swear I didn't mean to, I whispered, more to myself than to her. Her breath hitched, and then, to my surprise, she let out a bitter, humorless laugh. You're going to jail for this. My blood ran cold. I had been trying to defend my property. She was trespassing, stealing. But none of that mattered if the law saw me as the aggressor. The sirens sounded in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Max whined beside me, pacing nervously. Then, as if on cue, flashing red and blue lights filled the night sky. The sheriff's car skidded to a stop at the edge of my property, and 2 officers jumped out, guns drawn. Drop the weapon, one of them shouted. I raised my hands, my pulse hammering. It was an accident. I swear. One officer rushed to Maggie's side, while the other grabbed my shotgun and pushed me to my knees. I didn't resist. I was too stunned to move. The next few moments were a blur. Paramedics arrived. They bandaged Maggie, lifted her onto a stretcher, and carried her toward the ambulance. She never took her eyes off me, that same smirk still playing on her lips. She had something planned. I could feel it. As I watched the ambulance drive away, the sheriff turned to me, his face unreadable. Let's talk, he said. I sat in the back of the police car, my hands still shaking. The sheriff, a gruff-looking man named Tom Reynolds, leaned against the front of the vehicle, arms crossed. You want to tell me what happened? He asked, his voice calm but firm. I swallowed hard. She was trespassing. She was stealing my equipment. I fired a warning shot. She moved at the last second. Tom nodded, listening carefully. You got any cameras on your property? I felt a lump form in my throat. Not near the fence where it happened. His expression darkened. That's a problem. I stiffened. She attacked me first. I swear. Tom sighed, rubbing his temple. I believe you. But Maggie, she's a known troublemaker. She knows how to play the victim. I exhaled sharply. So what happens now? She'll press charges, he hesitated. And if she does, you're going to have a hell of a fight ahead of you. I clenched my fist. My entire life, everything I had built, was on the line. Then, as if the night hadn't been bad enough, something even worse happened. Tom's radio crackled. Sheriff, we got a situation back at the station. Go ahead, he replied, pressing the receiver. Someone just vandalized the farm owner's property. Fences torn down, barn doors busted. Looks like someone was sending a message. My stomach dropped. Maggie was in the hospital. That meant someone else was after me. Tom met my gaze, his expression turning grim. Looks like you've got more enemies than you thought. And just like that, the nightmare had only begun. I raced back to my farm, Sheriff Tom following close behind. My headlights cut through the darkness as I turned onto the gravel driveway. My gut twisted in a knot. Then I saw it, my fence, completely destroyed. The wooden planks lay scattered across the dirt like broken bones. My barn doors hung wide open, one of them barely hanging on by a hinge. My stomach churned as I stepped out of my truck, my boots crunching against shards of glass from a shattered window. Whoever did this wanted to send a message. Max, my dog, let out a low growl and sniffed at the air, his tail rigid. My farm had always been my safe haven, my retreat from the chaos of city life. Now, I felt like a crime scene. Sheriff Tom's face was hard as he scanned the destruction. You got any enemies besides Maggie? I shook my head. None that I know of. But deep down, I had a sinking feeling. This wasn't just random vandalism. Someone wanted me off this land. And I had a pretty good idea who. The next morning, I drove straight to the HOA office. It sat right in the middle of the fancy suburban neighborhood next to my farm. A pristine white building with neatly trimmed hedges and a sign that read Oakdale Homeowners Association. I barely stepped through the front door before the receptionist, a petite woman with blonde curls, looked up in alarm. Sir, do you have an appointment? I ignored her. I was here for one reason, Maggie. I stormed past the desk, pushing open the office door. Inside, the room was empty except for a large oak desk, a bookshelf filled with HOA rulebooks, and a perfectly arranged bouquet of flowers on the windowsill. Then I heard the voice. Looking for me? I turned to see Maggie standing in the doorway, her arm wrapped in a sling, a bandage peeking out from under her blouse. She smirked, the same smug expression she wore last night after the shooting. I clenched my fist. My farm was vandalized last night. She tilted her head. Oh, how tragic. My blood boiled. Cut the act. We both know you had something to do with it. Maggie sighed dramatically. I was in the hospital all night. There's no way I could have been involved. I stepped closer. Maybe not, but you have plenty of people who do your dirty work. Her lips curled into a sly smile. That's an interesting theory. But unfortunately for you, there's no proof. I knew she was playing me. She wanted me to lash out, to do something that would make me look like the bad guy. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I exhaled sharply and took a step back. I don't care what game you're playing. This is my land, and I'm not going anywhere. Maggie's smile didn't fade. We'll see about that. I spent the rest of the day repairing the damage to my farm. The barn doors were easy enough to fix, but the fence would take time. As I hammered in new planks, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to show up and finish what they started. By nightfall, exhaustion weighed heavy on my shoulders. I sat on the porch, sipping a cold beer, Max curled up at my feet. The moon cast a silver glow over the land, and for a moment, I let myself believe that things might settle down. Then the headlights appeared. A black SUV crawled down my driveway, its engine purring like a predator stalking its prey. My pulse quickened. I stood, my fingers tightening around the shotgun leaning against the porch railing. The SUV came to a stop. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped a man I had never seen before, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive suit. He adjusted his cufflinks before stepping toward me, a cold smirk on his face. "Mr. Walker," he asked smoothly. I didn't lower the shotgun. "Who's asking?" He chuckled. "My name is Vincent Graves. I represent certain interests in this community." I narrowed my eyes. "What kind of interests?" Vincent glanced around my property, his smile never faltering. "The kind that doesn't appreciate stubborn men getting in the way of progress." I stiffened. "This land isn't for sale." He sighed. "That's a shame, because my employers are very interested in acquiring it. And trust me, they always get what they want." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just about Maggie. Something much bigger was at play, and I had just become their next target. Vincent Graves stood there, his smirk as cold as the night air. I could tell just by looking at him. He wasn't some real estate agent or HOA representative. He was something worse. I tightened my grip on my shotgun. "I don't know what kind of game you and Maggie are playing, but you can tell your employers that my farm isn't for sale." Vincent chuckled, slow and measured, like he had all the time in the world. "Oh, Mr. Walker," he said, shaking his head. "I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to give you a warning." I didn't blink. "Go on." He took another step forward, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel. "You have two options. One, you take the generous offer that will be sent to you in the next few days. You pack up, move on with your life, and never look back." He paused, tilting his head. "Or two, well, let's just say accidents tend to happen in these rural areas." A chill ran through me. I wasn't an idiot. This wasn't just about money. Someone wanted me gone, and they were willing to play dirty. I squared my shoulders. "You think I scare easy?" Vincent sighed, feigning disappointment. "No, I don't. That's why this is going to get messy." I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. "You step foot on my land again, and you'll see just how messy things can get." For the first time, his smirk faltered. A long silence stretched between us before he finally spoke. "Suit yourself." Then, without another word, he turned, got back into his SUV, and drove off, his taillights disappearing into the darkness. I let out a slow breath. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I didn't waste any time. If someone wanted a war, I wasn't going to sit around and wait for them to make the next move. I drove straight to the sheriff's office, marching through the front door like a man on a mission. Sheriff Tom looked up from his desk, a knowing expression on his face. "You hear about last night?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. I nodded. "I had a visitor. Guy named Vincent Graves." Tom's expression darkened. "That name sound familiar to you?" I shook my head. "Should it?" Tom let out a slow sigh. "Vincent's not just some businessman. He's a fixer." I frowned. "A fixer?" "Yeah," Tom said, rubbing his temple. "Big corporations, corrupt HOAs, politicians, you name it. They hire him to solve problems. And if he's come knocking on your door, that means someone with deep pockets wants you gone. My stomach twisted. Who? Tom hesitated. Could be Maggie. Could be someone bigger. I clenched my fist. What do I do? Tom met my gaze. You stand your ground. But you be damn careful. I nodded, determination hardening in my chest. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. That night, I made sure my shotgun was loaded and my doors were locked. I wasn't taking any chances. I sat on my porch, watching the tree line, waiting. Then, just past midnight, I heard it, a rustling in the distance. Max's ears perked up, his body going rigid. I stood slowly, gripping my shotgun as I stepped off the porch. The moon cast long shadows across the land, making it hard to see. Then a sound, metal clanking. Someone was at my barn. I moved quickly but quietly, keeping to the shadows. The barn door was slightly open, swaying in the wind. I took a deep breath, then kicked the door open. Inside, two figures froze like deer caught in headlights. One of them bolted immediately, disappearing into the night. But the other, Maggie, her hands were wrapped around a canister of gasoline. My stomach dropped. She was going to burn my farm down. I raised my shotgun. Don't move. She blinked, then let out a nervous laugh. This isn't what it looks like. I stepped closer, my blood boiling. It looks like arson, Maggie. She scowled. You think you can just take over this land? Bring your filthy farm next to our perfect neighborhood? You ruined everything. My grip tightened. Get off my property. Maggie's eyes darted around, as if looking for an escape. But before she could move, bang, a gunshot rang out, shattering the silence. Maggie screamed, collapsing to the ground, clutching her leg. I spun around, my heart racing. A shadowy figure stood near the tree line, a gun in hand. Then, just as quickly as they appeared, they vanished into the darkness. Maggie writhed in pain on the ground, blood pooling beneath her. Why, you idiot? That wasn't you. I gritted my teeth. Someone else was out there. And they weren't done yet. Maggie's screams tore through the night, raw and panicked. She clutched her leg, her fingers slick with blood, her face contorted in pain. But my eyes weren't on her anymore. They were on the tree line. Someone had just fired that shot. Someone who wasn't me. I raised my shotgun, scanning the darkness, my pulse pounding in my ears. Max let out a deep growl, his body stiff, ears pinned forward. He saw something I couldn't. I took a step forward, my breath coming in slow, measured bursts. Who's out there? I called, my voice firm. No answer. I heard rustling, then silence. Whoever it was, they were still watching. A shiver crawled up my spine. I knelt down beside Maggie, never taking my eyes off the tree line. Can you walk? She let out a shaky breath. Do I look like I can walk? She spat, her usual arrogance now laced with fear. I ignored her attitude. I didn't have time for it. I needed to get us out of here fast. Carefully, I grabbed her under the arms and lifted her to her feet. She winced, but I didn't have time to be gentle. I half-carried, half-dragged her toward the house, my shotgun still clutched in my right hand. The whole time, I felt it, the weight of unseen eyes on my back. I shoved the front door open and pulled her inside, locking it behind me. Max ran in after us, still on edge. Maggie collapsed onto the couch, her breathing uneven. I swear to God, she muttered, her voice weak. If I die because of your stupid farm. You're not dying, I interrupted, grabbing a towel and pressing it against her wound. It was a through-and-through shot, not fatal, but she was losing blood fast. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator picked up. 911, what's your emergency? I exhaled sharply. There's been another shooting. The operator's tone turned serious. Is anyone injured? Yes, a woman. She's been shot in the leg. We need an ambulance now. Is the shooter still in the area? I swallowed hard. I don't know. 15 minutes later, red and blue lights flooded my driveway again. Sheriff Tom was the first one out of his car, his face a mask of frustration as he took one look at Maggie, then at me. Are you kidding me, Walker? He grumbled. Another shooting? What the hell is going on out here? I didn't fire that shot, I said firmly. Tom narrowed his eyes. Then who did? I clenched my jaw. That's what I want to know. Paramedics loaded Maggie onto a stretcher, and for once, she didn't have anything smart to say. Her face was pale, her body trembling from blood loss. As they wheeled her toward the ambulance, she reached out and grabbed my sleeve. Her fingers were cold. She looked up at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're coming for you next." I swallowed hard. "Who?" She tried to speak, but her strength gave out. Her hand slipped from my sleeve, and the paramedics pushed her into the ambulance, shutting the doors behind them. Sheriff Tom let out a slow sigh, rubbing his temple. "All right, start from the top." I told him everything. The shot in the dark, the figure in the woods, the feeling of being watched. Tom listened, his face growing darker with every word. "You think this has anything to do with that Vincent guy?" I asked. Tom's jaw tightened. "I don't think, Walker. I know." By the time the sheriff left, exhaustion weighed on my shoulders. I locked every door, closed every curtain, and sat in the living room with my shotgun resting on my lap. Max curled up beside me, his ears twitching at every sound. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Maggie's warning echoed in my head. "They're coming for you next." I didn't know who they were, but I had a feeling I was about to find out, and I wasn't sure if I was ready. Somewhere past 3 a.m., my exhaustion caught up to me. My eyes grew heavy, my body stiff from sitting too long. Just as I was about to drift off, crack, the sound of a breaking branch. I jolted awake, gripping my shotgun. Max's head snapped up, his ears pinned forward, a low growl rumbling from his throat. I held my breath, listening. A shadow moved past the window. I barely had time to react before. Boom! The front door exploded inward. 3 figures rushed inside, dressed in dark clothing, their faces masked. And they weren't here to talk. The front door exploded open, splinters flying across the room. Before I could even process what was happening, 3 masked men stormed inside, moving fast. Instinct took over. I dove behind the couch, my shotgun clutched tight. Max lunged, barking ferociously, his body a blur of motion. One of the intruders swung at him with a metal pipe, but Max was too fast, dodging out of the way and snapping at the guy's leg. I took my shot. Boom. The blast shook the entire room, the muzzle flash blinding for a split second. The man closest to me let out a strangled yell, dropping his weapon as buckshot tore into his shoulder. The second guy lunged forward, swinging a crowbar at me. I barely managed to roll away, his swings smashing into the wooden floor where I had been a second earlier. I racked the shotgun, ready to fire again. Click, empty. I cursed under my breath and ducked as another swing came flying at my head. The third man, the biggest of them all, grabbed the coffee table and flipped it over like it was nothing, sending papers and beer bottles crashing to the ground. I had no choice. I threw my empty shotgun at him. It wasn't much, but it hit him in the chest, making him stumble back just long enough for me to sprint toward the back door. Max followed, still snarling and snapping at their heels. I reached for the back door handle. A hand grabbed my shoulder. I was yanked back so hard that I hit the floor, my vision going blurry for a second. The big guy loomed over me, his fist clenched. A loud boom shook the entire house, not a gunshot. An explosion. The back window shattered as flames erupted outside. My barn was on fire. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't just here to hurt me. They were here to burn my farm to the ground. Rage replaced fear. I lashed out, kicking the big guy in the knee as hard as I could. He grunted and stumbled, giving me just enough time to scramble to my feet and grab the closest thing I could find, a fireplace poker. The guy who had been swinging the crowbar rushed at me again. I swung first. The metal rod slammed into his ribs, and he crumpled with a pained wheeze. The other 2 hesitated for half a second. That was all I needed. I bolted out the back door, Max at my side, my legs pumping as fast as they could go. I barely made it 20 feet before I saw another set of headlights barreling down my driveway. Sheriff Tom. The cavalry had arrived. The second the squad car skidded to a stop, the siren wailing, the intruders panicked. They took off running. One made it into the woods before Tom could get a shot off, but the other 2 weren't as lucky. "Freeze!" Tom bellowed, his gun trained on them. They didn't listen. Tom fired 2 warning shots. One of them hit home. The biggest guy collapsed onto the dirt, clutching his leg. The other kept running, disappearing into the night. Everything was chaos. Flames roared from my barn, the fire climbing higher by the second. Smoke burned my eyes. The sirens of the fire truck wailed in the distance. Tom rushed toward me, his face pale. "You all right?" I coughed, wiping the soot from my face. "My barn. I called it in," he said quickly. "They're on their way." I exhaled sharply, nodding, my chest heaving. My farm was still standing, but just barely. As the fire crew arrived and started hosing down the barn, I turned to Tom. You recognize those guys? Tom's expression hardened. I recognized the one I shot. He's Vincent's muscle. I gritted my teeth. So he really did send them. Tom nodded. Looks that way. This was never just about the HOA. This was bigger. I had been targeted. The next morning, I stood in what remained of my barn, the smell of burned wood thick in the air. The fire department had put it out before it could spread, but the damage was bad. Maggie was in the hospital. One of the attackers was in custody. And Vincent? He was nowhere to be found. I turned to Tom, who was flipping through a folder of reports. What happens now? He let out a slow breath. The guy we caught isn't talking yet, but I'll keep pressing him. As for Vincent, he's slippery. Might take some time to track him down. I clenched my fist. And in the meantime, Tom's gaze was firm. You keep your shotgun loaded. You watch your back. Because until we get him, he's not done with you. I exhaled. I wasn't backing down. I had worked too hard for this land. I wasn't going to let some corrupt HOA and their hired thugs scare me away. They wanted a war? They had one. And I wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.